Zanil was the kind of woman who made people stop and stare, not just because of her beauty but because of the way she carried herself. Her dark skin glowed like polished bronze, and her smile was so warm it felt like sunlight after a long rain. She loved dressing in colorful African prints, with bright head wraps that told stories of her heritage. In the lively town of Kamara, where the streets buzzed with laughter, music, and the aroma of fresh street food, everyone knew Zanil. People admired her not only for her looks but for her gentle heart. She was the woman who greeted even strangers with kindness, the wife who stood proudly beside her husband, Tawanda. But lately something felt wrong, like a shadow creeping into her once happy home. Tawanda wasn't the man she fell in love with anymore. He came home late, barely looked at her, and when he did, his eyes were cold and distant. Zanil still smiled in public, but inside, she felt a heaviness she couldn't explain. She would often sit by the window at night, watching the lights of Kamara flicker, wondering if her marriage was slipping through her fingers, and if Tawanda was hiding something she wasn't ready to face. Tawanda had not always been this way. There was a time when he would rush home just to see Zanil's smile, when his laughter filled their small house, and when every touch felt like a promise of forever. But now all that warmth was gone. His eyes, once soft and full of love, had turned cold and distant, like a stranger she no longer knew. Every time Zanil tried to talk to him, he would shrug her off with a few careless words, his face buried in his phone or pretending to be too tired to talk. He came home late almost every night, smelling of places she didn't recognize, his shirt creased, and his excuses rehearsed. Zanil noticed the way he guarded his phone as if it was a box of secrets. He never left it on the table anymore. He would keep it close, even when he went to the bathroom, his fingers tapping on it with a nervousness that made her heart ache. Sometimes she would catch him staring at her with an expression she couldn't read, something sharp, almost hateful, before quickly looking away. At night, when Tawanda turned his back to her in bed, Zanil lay awake, her mind racing with questions. What happened to the man I married? What is he hiding from me? She tried to tell herself it was just work stress or exhaustion, but deep down, she felt it was something darker, something that had built a wall between them. The silence between them grew heavier with each passing day, pressing down on her chest like an invisible weight. Zanil missed the man who once held her hand under the stars, who whispered dreams of their future. Now every glance, every word from Tawanda felt cold, as if he had already left her in his heart, even while sleeping beside her. And that was the kind of pain that no one could see, but it burned her from the inside out. Would you like me to write 3? Anil, the unexpected guest, 350 words. In the same emotional, engaging style next? When Anil arrived at their home, it felt like a fresh breeze sweeping through a room that had been locked up for too long. She was Tawanda's younger sister, full of life, with a smile that could melt away even the heaviest of moods. From the very first day, she treated Zanil not as a sister-in-law, but as an older sister she had always admired. Anil had a way of noticing when Zanil was quiet or lost in thought, and she would come sit beside her, nudging her gently until she laughed. It had been a long time since Zanil had laughed like that, real laughter, the kind that makes your heart feel lighter. The two women grew close almost instantly. They cooked together in the evenings, filling the kitchen with the smell of spices, roasted meat, and fresh vegetables. Anil loved to tell funny stories from her university life, acting them out so dramatically that Zanil would end up in tears from laughing. At night, after Tawanda had gone to bed, the two would sit on the couch with cups of warm tea, whispering about everything: love, dreams, even secrets they had never shared with anyone else. Zanil found comfort in those talks. It was as if Anil could see through her forced smiles and sense the storm brewing in her heart. Unlike Tawanda, who now felt like a stranger, Anil brought warmth and life back into the house. She would help Zanil with chores, surprise her with little gifts from the market, or simply hold her hand when she sensed Zanil was sad. Sometimes Zanil wondered if Anil could see the cracks in her marriage, the cold silence that filled the rooms whenever Tawanda was home. But Anil never pushed. She just stayed close, like a sister, like someone Zanil didn't realize she needed. For the first time in weeks, Zanil felt less alone. Anil's presence reminded her of what true family and love felt like. A kind of love that wasn't heavy or cold, but warm, free, and safe. Would you like me to write 4? A chilling whisper, 350 to 400 words. In the same It was a quiet evening, the kind of night when the air outside feels heavy and still. Zanil was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes while Anil hummed softly in the living room. The soft clinking of plates was the only sound until Tawanda's phone rang in the other room. She wasn't trying to listen, but his voice, sharp, low, and tense, cut through the silence like a blade. Something in his tone made her freeze. She leaned closer to the doorway, her heart beating faster, as if her body already knew something terrible was coming. "I told you," Tawanda's voice hissed. "She needs to be out of the way. Once she's gone, the land will be ours. No one will stop me." The words hit Zanil like a slap. She felt her breath catch, her hands trembling so hard that she almost dropped the plate she was holding. Who was he talking about? Was he talking about me? Her mind spun, replaying every cold glance, every late night, every guarded whisper on his phone. The room felt smaller, the air suddenly hard to breathe. She pressed her back against the wall, her heart pounding in her ears. Ending her once and for all. The words echoed in her mind, slicing through her chest like knives. Was this the man she married? The man who once promised to protect her? A wave of fear crawled through her body, cold and paralyzing. Anil's laughter from the living room sounded distant, like it was coming from another world. Zanil quickly wiped her wet hands on her dress, her mind in a haze. She wanted to confront him, to scream, to demand the truth, but fear pinned her to the floor. What if he knew she had overheard? What if tonight was the night he planned something? In that moment, Zanil realized the danger wasn't just in her heart or her imagination. It was real. And the man she once loved might be planning her end. Would you like me to write 5? The Perfect Dinner Trap, 350 words. In the same gripping and emotional style next? The next morning, Tawanda's mood changed so suddenly that it almost felt unnatural. He woke up with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and spoke with a forced cheerfulness that made Zanil's skin crawl. "I've been thinking," he said, holding her hand a little too tightly. "We should have a family dinner tonight. Just the three of us. I want to make things right." His voice sounded soft, but there was something underneath it, something Zanil couldn't trust. All day he acted like a perfect husband, helping around the house, laughing with Anil, and complimenting Zanil on everything she did. But the sweetness felt fake, like a mask he was wearing. It was as if he wanted her to believe he was the same loving man she married. Yet, the memory of that phone call echoed in her mind, and every smile he gave her felt like a trap waiting to snap shut. When evening came, Tawanda insisted on preparing fresh fruit juice himself. He cut the fruits with a strange focus, glancing at Zanil from time to time with a smile that made her stomach twist. "Tonight will be special," he said, his tone overly sweet, almost rehearsed. He poured the juice into 3 glasses, placing one in front of her with careful hands, his eyes watching her closely. Zanil's heart pounded as she stared at the glass. Something about the way he looked at her made her feel like this wasn't just a simple dinner. She tried to smile, but her fingers trembled slightly as she picked up the cup. What if this is it? The thought screamed in her head, but she kept quiet. Anil was chatting happily, not sensing the tension that wrapped around the table like a snake ready to strike. Zanil forced herself to stay calm, but deep inside, every instinct screamed that this dinner wasn't about making things right. It was about finishing what he had started. "Would you like me to write 6? A cup that spells death, 350 words. In the same style next?" Tawanda's hands looked steady as he poured the drinks, but Zanil's sharp eyes caught the tiny flicker of nerves in his movements. He poured her glass last, carefully, almost too carefully, like it was more important than the others. When he placed it in front of her, his gaze lingered for a second too long, and that was when she felt it, a silent alarm ringing deep inside her chest. She looked at the glass, the bright, sweet-smelling juice catching the light from the kitchen lamp. It looked harmless, refreshing even, but something about the way Tawanda's eyes darted between her and the cup made her stomach twist. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. What if this is it? What if this is how it ends? Tawanda sat down across from her, smiling too much, his voice suddenly soft and sweet. "Go on, my love, have a sip," he said, his tone playful, but his eyes locked on her face, waiting, watching. The air felt heavy, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Zanil forced a smile, but her hands trembled as she picked up the glass. It felt heavier than it should, almost like holding her own fate. Her throat tightened, and for a moment she thought she could hear Anil's laughter in the background. but it sounded far away, muffled by the pounding fear in her chest. Tawanda reached for his own cup, but he didn't drink. He just held it, pretending to be casual while his eyes stayed fixed on hers. That tiny detail screamed at Zanil. Something wasn't right. Every instinct in her body told her not to take that first sip. She sat there, cup in hand, a frozen smile on her lips, her mind racing. In that moment, she knew one thing for certain. This was no ordinary drink. This was a test. A trap. And she had to find a way to survive it. Shall I write 7? The silent switch, 350 words. Next, keeping the same tense and suspenseful tone? Zanil sat there, her fingers wrapped tightly around the glass, her mind racing faster than her heartbeat. She could feel Tawanda's eyes watching her every move, though he tried to look relaxed, pretending to be busy with his food. Her instincts screamed louder with every second that passed. Something was wrong with that drink. It wasn't just fear, it was a deep gut feeling, the kind that a woman cannot ignore. Anil was sitting beside her, happily chatting about something funny she had seen in town earlier. She had no idea about the storm of fear that was building in Zanil's chest. When Tawanda turned slightly, reaching for the salt at the end of the table, Zanil saw her chance. Her hand moved quickly, almost like it had a mind of its own. With a smooth, quiet motion, she slid her glass toward Anil's side and took Anil's glass in return. It was done so casually, so naturally that neither of them noticed. Her heart thumped so hard she was sure someone could hear it. She forced a small laugh at Anil's story, pretending nothing was wrong. But inside she was shaking. Was she being paranoid? Or was this the only thing saving her life? When Tawanda turned back, his eyes flicked to her glass. For a split second, Zanil thought he looked tense, as though he was waiting for something to happen. That look alone was enough to confirm her fears. She held Anil's glass gently, like it was a shield, while Tawanda's gaze softened again, pretending to be calm. Zanil didn't know for sure if the drink was poison, but her body told her everything she needed to know. This was not the night to trust him. She smiled, a smile that masked her fear, and waited. Would you like me to continue with 8? The sudden collapse, 350 words. In the same suspenseful and emotional style? Anil, still smiling and chatting, reached for the glass in front of her without a second thought. Zanil's stomach clenched as she watched her bring it to her lips. For a heartbeat she wanted to stop her, to shout and knock the glass from her hand, but the words stuck in her throat. Before Zanil could move, Anil took a long sip, laughing mid-sentence. Then it happened. Anil coughed suddenly, the sound harsh and sharp. At first, Zanil thought she had just swallowed wrong. But then Anil's face twisted in pain. Her laughter turned into violent coughing, her hand clutching at her throat as she gasped for air. The room froze. Zanil's heart dropped as she watched the color drain from Anil's face, turning it pale, almost gray. Her body trembled before she collapsed from the chair, hitting the floor with a dull thud. Anil! Zanil screamed, rushing to her side, her hands trembling as she tried to lift her. Anil's breaths came out in shallow, desperate gasps, her eyes wide with panic. Tears blurred Zanil's vision as her worst fear became real. Something was in that drink. Something deadly. Tawanda jumped up from his chair, pretending to panic, shouting Anil's name. But Zanil saw something else in his eyes. A flicker of horror, not for Anil's pain, but for the failure of his plan. It was only a second, but it was enough. She felt her blood turn cold. Zanil cradled Anil's head, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "Stay with me, Anil, stay with me," she whispered, her voice breaking. The room was filled with chaos, Tawanda pacing, pretending to call for help, while Zanil's mind screamed that this wasn't an accident. In that moment everything was clear. The man she had loved, the man she thought would protect her, had tried to kill her. And if not for her instincts, it would have been her lying on the floor, fighting for every breath. Shall I continue with 9? Tawanda's fear and fury, 350 words. Next, keeping the same intense and emotional tone? Tawanda rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside Anil, his voice filled with fake panic. "Anil! Anil, what's wrong? Breathe. Stay with me," he shouted. But there was something in his tone that felt hollow, rehearsed. Zanil's tear-filled eyes were fixed on him, but through her fear and chaos she noticed it, the quick flash of horror that crossed his face, not because Anil was in pain, but because something had gone terribly wrong. His plan had failed. His hands hovered over Anil as if he didn't know what to do. He kept glancing at the glass on the table, his jaw tightening, his lips pressed into a thin line. Zanil's heart pounded harder. She had been right all along. That drink, her drink, was never meant for Anil. It was meant for her. The realization hit her like a storm, and the fear inside her slowly burned into anger. Tawanda, call an ambulance. Zanil yelled, her voice shaking but strong. He fumbled with his phone, muttering curses under his breath, his eyes darting to Zanil with a mix of fear and frustration. For the first time she saw him without his mask. The coldness in his eyes was no longer hidden. Zanil knelt by Anil, holding her trembling hand, tears streaming down her face. But even through the chaos, she couldn't look away from Tawanda. He wasn't just shocked, he was furious that his plan had failed. Furious that Anil was the one gasping on the floor instead of Zanil. He slammed his phone down for a second, his face twisted in anger before quickly forcing another mask of concern. Help is coming, he said, but Zanil wasn't fooled anymore. She saw him for who he really was, a man capable of killing his own sister to cover his tracks. At that moment something inside Zanil hardened. She would not let him win. Shall I continue with 10? The battle for truth, 350 words. In the same gripping tone? The ambulance siren wailed through the night as Zanil sat beside Anil, holding her hand tightly while paramedics worked frantically. Anil's weak breaths and pale face tore Zanil apart inside. Her grief was so heavy it felt like it was crushing her chest, but beneath that pain, something stronger began to rise, rage. Hot, unshakable rage. She wiped her tears and stared out of the ambulance window, her jaw clenched. This cannot end like this. I will not stay silent. Tawanda followed in his car, his face a mask of fake worry, but Zanil no longer saw the man she had married. She saw a stranger. A monster. Every cold glance, every late-night disappearance, every secret phone call now made sense. He had been planning this. He wanted her gone. He wanted her family's land. And tonight he had almost succeeded. When they arrived at the hospital, doctors rushed Anil into the emergency room. Zanil was left in the hallway, her hands trembling but her mind sharper than ever. No more fear, she whispered to herself. No more pretending. She could feel the fire of determination burning in her chest. Tawanda tried to put his arm around her, but she stepped away. The way he looked at her, nervous, calculating, only confirmed what she already knew. She stared him straight in the eyes, and for the first time he looked away. That small act told her everything. He knew she had figured him out. In that moment, Zanil made a silent promise to herself. She would uncover every lie, every plan, every dirty secret he had buried. She would gather proof, expose him, and make sure the world saw who Tawanda truly was. He would face his sins no matter what it took. Her fear was gone. What replaced it was power. Shall I continue with 11? A Wife's Courage, 350 words. Showing how Zanil starts gathering evidence and becoming stronger? Zanil returned home from the hospital with her heart still pounding, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from determination. Anil was stable, and that gave her the strength to focus on the battle ahead. She could no longer sit back and hope things would get better. Tawanda had shown her who he truly was, and now it was her turn to fight back. She started quietly, moving through the house like a shadow. When Tawanda was out, she searched through his drawers, files, and hidden places where she knew he kept his private things. It felt like walking through fire, her hands trembling every time she touched something that wasn't hers, but she pushed through the fear. And then she found it. A hidden folder with documents about her family's land, signed agreements, and plans that proved he was trying to take everything from her. Her heart stopped for a moment, but then she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of everything. Late at night, when Tawanda stepped out to make his secret phone calls, Zanil began recording them. She would sit quietly in the next room, her phone set to record every cold, cruel word he spoke. Every conversation confirmed what she already knew. He had been plotting for months, and she had almost walked into his trap. But Zanil was no longer the quiet, trusting wife he thought she was. She was changing. Each day she grew stronger, smarter, braver. She moved carefully, never letting him sense her new strength. She smiled when he smiled, played the role of the loving wife, but deep down, she was a warrior sharpening her sword. She knew the day would come when she would strike back. Shall I continue with 12? The trap is reversed, 350 words. Where Zanil exposes Tawanda in front of everyone. The house was glowing with warm lights, and the smell of freshly cooked food filled the air. But Zanil's heart was steady and cold like steel. This was not just a family dinner. This was the night she would end Tawanda's game. She had spent days planning it, inviting Tawanda's family and the elders of Kamara under the pretense of a peace gathering. She told everyone she wanted to fix her marriage, to bring harmony back into their home. But deep inside she knew tonight was about truth. Tawanda walked around smiling, pretending to be the perfect husband. He greeted his family with hugs, laughed with the elders, and even tried to hold Zanil's hand as if nothing had happened. But Zanil didn't flinch. She had her recordings ready, hidden on her phone like a secret weapon. The evening started with polite conversations and laughter, but Zanil's mind was focused. When everyone was seated, she stood up slowly. Her voice trembled slightly at first, but her eyes were sharp and unshaken. "There is something I need to share with all of you," she said, holding the phone in her hand. Before Tawanda could stop her, she pressed play. His own voice filled the room, cold, cruel, and unrecognizable. The recording revealed everything. His plan to end her once and for all, and take control of her family's land. The room went silent. Faces turned pale. Tawanda froze, his fake smile vanishing as the weight of his own words sank in. "No, this is not what it sounds like," Tawanda shouted, but no one believed him. His mother looked at him with tears in her eyes, while the elders shook their heads in disbelief. Zanil stood tall, her heart pounding but her spirit unshaken. For the first time she felt free. Shall I continue with 13? Justice falls heavy, 350 words. Where Tawanda faces the consequences of his betrayal. The room was filled with shocked silence, the only sound being Tawanda's own voice still playing from the recording. His mask of charm had completely shattered, and everyone could now see the man he truly was. Before he could say another word, one of the elders stood up and called the local authorities. Tawanda's eyes widened in panic. "No, you don't understand. It's not what you think," he shouted, his voice desperate and trembling. But it was too late. When the police arrived, the elders handed them the recordings and the documents Zanil had gathered as evidence. The officers looked at Tawanda with cold, stern faces as they read him his rights. "Tawanda and Cube, you are under arrest for attempted murder and fraud," one of them declared. Tawanda's face twisted in anger and disbelief. He turned to Zanil, his voice filled with venom. "You think you've won, Zanil? You'll regret this," he spat, but even his threats sounded weak now. Zanil stood quietly, her hands clenched but her expression calm. She didn't flinch. She watched as they put the handcuffs on him, each click of the metal cuffs feeling like a victory for every tear she had shed. At that moment, Anil appeared at the doorway, still weak but able to stand. Her eyes met Zanil's and tears welled up. She walked slowly toward her, her voice soft and trembling. "If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be alive," Anil whispered, holding Zanil's hands tightly. There was both gratitude and guilt in her eyes. "You saved me, Zanil. I'll never forget this." Zanil hugged her gently, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. "We saved each other," she replied. As the police car drove Tawanda away, the weight that had crushed Zanil's soul for so long began to lift. She had faced her worst fear, and she had won. Shall I continue with 14? Sisters Beyond Blood, 350 words. Where Zanil and Anil share a heartfelt bond after everything they've endured. The hospital room was quiet, with only the soft sound of Anil's breathing and the beeping of the monitor beside her bed. Zanil sat on the chair next to her, holding her hand gently, her thumb brushing over Anil's warm skin. It had been a long and painful few days, but seeing Anil awake, alive and slowly recovering filled Zanil's heart with relief she couldn't put into words. Tears welled up in her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of gratitude and love. Anil turned her head slightly, her weak smile lighting up her pale face. "Zanil." Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "I don't even know what to say. If you hadn't trusted your heart that night, I wouldn't be here. You saved me." Her eyes glistened as she spoke, and Zanil squeezed her hand gently, shaking her head. "No, Anil. We saved each other. You gave me strength when I felt alone in that house. You reminded me of who I was, Zanil said, her voice trembling with emotion. Anil's eyes filled with tears, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. I used to think you were just my brother's wife, she whispered, her voice breaking. But now I see you are my true sister. Blood doesn't make family, love does. And I promise you, Zanil, I will stand by your side for the rest of my life. Zanil couldn't hold back her tears anymore. She leaned forward and hugged Anil gently, their hearts beating with the same pain and strength. At that moment they weren't just two women who had survived betrayal. They were sisters, bound by something stronger than blood. For the first time in days, Zanil felt peace in her heart. She wasn't alone anymore. Shall I move to 15? A new dawn for Zanil, 350 words. And give the story a powerful and uplifting ending? The first light of dawn painted the sky in soft shades of gold and pink as Zanil stepped onto the balcony of her family home. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the sweet scent of morning dew and blooming flowers. She stood tall, wearing a royal African gown that shimmered in the sunlight, the bold colors reflecting her strength and pride. For the first time in a long while she felt truly free. Her journey had not been easy. The pain, the betrayal, and the fear had cut her deeply, but those wounds had turned into scars of courage. She had faced the darkness head-on and walked out stronger. The woman who once stayed silent, smiling to hide her pain, was gone. In her place stood a warrior, a woman who had found her voice and her power. As the sun rose over Kamara, Zanil closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of a new beginning. The world seemed to whisper to her, promising hope, peace, and endless possibilities. Behind her, Anil's soft laughter echoed from inside the house, a reminder that family wasn't always by blood, but by love and loyalty. Zanil smiled, her heart calm and proud. This was not the end of her story. This was the dawn of a new chapter, one she would write with strength, love, and unshakable grace. Would you like me to compile all 15 parts into one powerful flowing story, around 4,500 to 5,000 words, with smooth transitions?